1001 Arabian Nights. Once upon a time in ancient Arabia, there was a sultan who had a splendid harem of over 500 young women, who all belonged to him, just as animals might belong to a person of our day. And blessed by the injunctions of his religion and culture, they were there for his pleasure, all picked for their beauty, charm, and special gifts of dancing or singing. And of all the beautiful concubines, the Sultan had a favorite, one whom he loved to dally and sport with more than all the rest. One day word was brought to the Sultan that the hunting was excellent, and he desired to go on an expedition for some sport outside the walls of his palace. So elephants and gun-bearers, supplies and cooks, beaters and hunters, horses and dogs, and a legion of men were assembled to go with the Sultan on his hunting expedition. He was to be away almost a fortnight. But after only a week of hunting, although he loved the excitement of the hunt, the Sultan began to miss his favorite concubine and the sweet pleasures of the bed, and thought it would be a great idea to steal back secretly into his palace and surprise his chosen girl for a night of delicious love. He had his swiftest horse brought to him, and taking only 3 men set out back for the palace. Arriving in the evening all unannounced, he stole into his inner chambers with his 3 guards, without anyone knowing that he was there. But as he came to his bedroom where he had spent so many delicious nights with his favorite, and he flung open the door, he found the object of his desire in his bed with a black eunuch. They both flung themselves to the floor and piteously cried for mercy. But the Sultan's eyes grew red with anger, and he flew into a rage. In an angry voice he called for both of them to be seized, and for the eunuch to be tortured slowly to death. And for his concubine, he didn't even look at her. His heart had been spoiled, and its doors were now shut. He told his guards to gather together the harem, to take all of them to the wall above the river, and then, in front of all of them, to put the young woman in a burlap bag with 3 cats from the palace, and throw them in the river to drown. From that time on, he lived as one betrayed by life, and especially as one who had seen the source of that betrayal as a woman. Indeed, all the women of his harem, for he felt surely they were all in this together. From that time on, whenever a girl was called to be his companion for the night, she was never seen by her sisters again. For after he had made love to the girl, he had her killed. All the girls lived in utter fear of the Sultan, and the atmosphere in the palace became one of a graveyard. There was no real happiness. Not a soul dared to show delight, nor humor, nor joyous laughter. Whenever a girl was chosen to spend the night with the Sultan, she knew it was to be her last night alive. All her sisters in the harem comforted her, knowing that this was to be their fate as well, and all suggested ways of pleasing the Sultan, and perhaps pleasuring him so exquisitely that he would be compassionate towards her and let her live. Whenever a new girl was brought before the Sultan, he told her to undress and get into bed with him. Each young girl sought to do his bidding in such a sensual, beautiful, seductive, delightful, eager, and alluring way, praying that she would please him with her beauty and charm alone, that she would pleasure him so well that he would not kill her. But none of the young girls ever returned. One night the Sultan chose a concubine by the name of Scheherazade to come to him. She heard that the Sultan had chosen her as he watched the girls bathe from behind the carved screens where he often came to pick his companion for the night. She knew that her life was now in immediate danger. She knew that tonight was to be her last night alive, unless she could please the Sultan. She wondered whether she would ever see her young friends or family again. She knew that unless she did something extraordinary tonight, many more, indeed all, of the young girls who lived within the harem would die. That evening, a full moon rose in the east, and sweet-scented jasmine wafted through the shutters of the palace windows. The Sultan lay on satin sheets on his huge bed. Frankincense, myrrh, and camphor filled the room, lit only by candles. Scheherazade was brought in by the eunuchs, freshly washed, and the door was closed behind her. She looked at the Sultan. He lay on his bed and looked at her. Not a sound could be heard from anything or anyone. She bowed before him. He continued to look at her as at something, but not at someone. As a man might look at something he pitied and yet loved. He spoke. "Take off your clothes." She took a step forward, radiant and strong in the acceptance of her fate. She addressed him. "O great Sultan, it is said that the beauty of a woman is one of the delights that has been given to man by God. Do you know how this gift was first given and why? Do you know who the first woman was and how she looked and why God gave her to a man? Do you know the story of their first night together and what became of them?" The Sultan heard the words of the concubine Scheherazade and sat up a little and looked at her. He was intrigued. None of the girls had ever come to him like this. Most he knew were scared to death, and they sought only to please him immediately with their beauty and feminine charms. Here was something different. "Tell me this story, and then we will make love," he said. And so she began. Scheherazade began a story that started high up in the mountains of the heart, and like a small spring burst forth in such happy and delightful purity, that the Sultan was absorbed in its flow and turns and twists, and delights and adventures, so that the whole night went by like a single moment of pleasure, and the sun had begun to lighten the sky in the east, and she had still not finished her story. The Sultan, both pleased and delightfully exhausted from listening, bade her go to sleep and told her to continue the story the next evening. The next evening was much like the first, except the story became more interesting and was still not finished as the sun lit the minarets of the Sultan's palace, and again the Sultan bade Scheherazade go to sleep, and he would continue the story the next evening. And again, and again, and again, the evenings passed in story, and for season after season, year after year, night after night, until 1,001 Arabian nights had passed, and Scheherazade noticed that the Sultan had changed in his disposition. He was able to feel again, beyond his hurt, and he was able to trust and appreciate and to laugh and to marvel at the wondrous story that was spread out before him, and he began to marvel at the wondrous life that was spread out before him, and he felt remorse for what he had done to the young sisters of Scheherazade, and his heart softened, and he fell in love with the one who had been the bringer of this gift in the world for him. And he married Scheherazade, and made her his sweet wife, and the harem was set free from the threat of death, and the palace once again came to life, and the land and the people blossomed under the wise and compassionate rule of the Sultan and his consort Scheherazade.